So Grandma tilted the journal to the light and began to read the faint, spidery writing. As I stared back at all those people who had come to look over the children from the orphan train and perhaps choose one, I hoped with all my might that Danny and Mike would find a home together. Danny, at 10, was tall and strong for his age and had a careful, well-worked-out answer for everything. He carried his shoulders back and his chin high. Stubborn, a few people said about him. Determined, said others. Everyone agreed, however, that eventually he'd do well for himself. But I saw a vulnerable side of Danny most people couldn't see, and I wasn't as sure. When Danny was only 7, Da had overheard him explaining to Mike an elaborate escape route back to our home, just in case those big blokes from 17th Street ever decide to come after us. Da had laughed and said to Ma, "You'll never have to worry about Danny. If the fates ever choose to deal the boy a bad hand, they'll find him well prepared to take care of the problem." And later, when he had grown old enough to work as a shiner, Danny had come home limping a bit, tugged off his right boot, and proudly dumped a handful of pennies on the table. He had rubbed his sore right foot as he announced, "Those bullies on the avenue aren't going to get my hard-earned coppers." Ma had smiled and tousled his curly brown hair, calling him my careful, cautious child. Danny had been very close to Da, and he had suffered terribly the loss of a father when Da died. It wasn't long before he'd attached himself to Mike, and no one could even waggle a scolding finger in Mike's direction without Danny jumping to Mike's defense. Mike, only a year older and an inch shorter than Danny, had such a ready sense of mischief that he seemed an unlikely one to take on the job of father. Would Da be proved right about Danny? I didn't know. When we learned from the people at the Children's Aid Society that we'd probably be separated and placed with different families, I'd seen the shock and terror in Danny's eyes. He'd edged close to Mike, and I'd heard him say, his voice quivering, "We'll stick together, you and me, huh, Mike?" I would have given anything to be able to promise Danny then and there that his fear of being parted from his brother was groundless. But I couldn't promise. I didn't know what would happen until that day in the church when a kind couple chose Danny and Peg together. It was a boy and a girl they had come looking for, and there was no room for Mike. When it was time to leave, little Peg, only 7 years old, her face wet with tears, took her foster mother's hand trustingly. But Danny, oh, how I ached to see the misery on his face as he said goodbye to Mike. "You'll have a good home with these people," I'd told Danny with all the confidence I could muster. But a nagging part of my mind kept scolding, "How can you speak so bravely? How can you possibly know that your words are the truth?" Chapter 2. Daniel James Kelly took his sister's hand and held it tightly. "Stop sniveling, Peg," he ordered. "You don't have to be afraid any more." Peg looked up at him and tried to speak, but out came a strangled sob. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, and her eyelids were swollen and red. Danny felt as miserable as Peg looked. He had convinced himself that he understood why Ma had sent her children west on the orphan train, but now his throat hurt and his eyes stung as he thought about the dream that had ended. It had been his own dream, one that he hadn't dared share with anyone, even with Mike. Even though Da had died more than 2 years earlier, Danny still remembered vividly his father's touch and smile. After a long while, although he still missed Da terribly, the dream began. He'd begun to hope with all his heart that someday his mother would marry again and give him another father. There was a huge, empty place in his life that only a father could fill. But all that was in the past, and now he and Peg were going to live with strangers. Andrew McNair, the tall scout who had brought them from New York City to St. Joseph, Missouri on the orphan train, stepped forward to say goodbye to Danny and Peg and to the foster parents who had offered them a home. He handed Alfrid Swenson the tightly wrapped bundle that contained Danny's and Peg's belongings. "I'll pay you a visit in about 6 months," he said. "Have a safe trip home." Alfrid Swenson was tall and bony. His sparse, pale blonde hair topped blue, solemn eyes set in a deeply sunburned face.